So Ayub Sahab, when we talk about manifestos of political parties, and there is often criticism on these manifestos that they are mere wish lists and they are grand promises to the people, and there is no substantive policy measures put forward for the people. Can you suggest some of the policy measures to be included in these manifestos, especially when we talk about climate change and agriculture?
Very rightly brought on, ma'am. We have to understand the policy cycle. It starts with the policy making, then policy advocacy, then policy implementation, and then there's a feedback back to the rectification of the policy. So political parties have to understand the entire policy cycle, and no policy is completely independent in the modern world. Every single policy that they will be introducing or they have in their manifesto to be introduced ought to be linked with the other policies, and they impact the other policies. Now, when we're talking of the climate change, it's an overarching phenomena that affects all the sectors. It affects the health sector, the education sector, the social sector, the economic sector, the development sector, and the production sectors. So these policies, I mean, in terms of the climate change policies that I'm talking about, ought to be all-encompassing, and the political parties have to understand and show as to which policy is how to be tailored to come in conformity with the climate change policy that they'll be introducing, and what the overall climate change measures, climate resilience measures, and disaster reduction measures, and risk reduction measures they'll be introducing in terms of the impact they have onto the people. Flood reduction, maybe because the flood is one of the major disasters that we face, and it affects most part of the people. Around 35% of Pakistan it affected last year, in the last few years, I'm sorry. So you see, what measures are they going to introduce to sustainably address this issue? And I think political parties have to keep in mind the sustainability and policy continuity also.
Of course.
Any whimsical policy or isolated policy only for the sake of fetching votes, as you said, it's a wish list. Yes, it's a wish list, will not work as such, and they have to come back on it. Their sustainability, a policy's resilience itself, on sustainability itself and advocacy itself is dependent upon how good that policy is, how effective that policy is, and how much it will be bought by the people. If a policy is coming out of the people, out of the wish of the people, understanding of the people, and has impact onto the people in return, that policy sustains itself. No government, no political instability, and no disaster can change that policies. And we have many examples of policies working in Pakistan that were grand and that were of such kind. So the political parties ought to understand that and have to introduce in their manifestos even now, or if not done, after coming to the offices, undertake those policies which are sustainable and which are linked to the climate change, which introduce climate resilience, exploiting the resources that are available globally.
And Ayub Shah Sahab, when we talk about, of course, the political parties' manifestos, decarbonizing the economy, and of course that remains an important aspect. Do you think there is clarity among the political parties, and what needs to be done to take those steps? Because climate change is not an individual issue in itself. It is going to be impacting our economic development, economic progress as well. So do you think there is clarity among these political parties, and what needs to be done to bring that clarity?
Yes, to the best of my understanding, there are big gaps. There is no clarity across the policy corridors at the moment in the political parties. And it's very rightly been reflected in their manifestos by the lack of this very subject being addressed rightfully. So this clarity has to be built. They have to understand that the sustainability of the policies is important. They have to understand the conformity of the policies to the climate resilience is important. And they have to understand how all of their policies in all the sectors that they are trying to touch upon ought to be made in line with the climate resilience and to be exploited. The climate resilience is something that we have to work on. If we invest in the climate resilience, we will not be investing in disaster management, or will not be wasting our resources.
So when we talk about decarbonizing for economic development, in your opinion, what steps should be taken, are needed in the manifestos, that these are concrete steps that we are going to be taking for decarbonization, and they are going to be impacting our economic development?
We have to incentivize, the decarbonization can be done across different sectors in different manners. It's a very complex phenomena. But right away, say, if I have to pick up an example and say how it can be done in the industrial sector, that is production sector, we have to transform from the carbon emission or carbon intensive or fossil fuel intensive manufacturing to the least carbon fuel consumption industry. And that is, this is a major change. We have a lot of industry in Pakistan from small to medium and medium to large, like cement production, like steel production, which are carbon intensive. They emit a lot of carbon. So not only that their emission has to be transformed and made environmentally safe, but also their inputs have to be looked into. So we have to turn towards innovation across all the sectors. We have to turn towards, similarly is the case of the transport sector. So if we have to talk of the mass transits or maybe the railway system itself, probably in the world we have electric trains there. But in Pakistan we have highly fuel dependent, the renewable, non-renewable fuel dependent trains, and it's a massive network. Similarly, our dependence upon the trucks, that is in transportation of the goods and the containers across the country is too much, which should be reduced. Say a truck is extremely highly dependent upon the on the fossil fuels, and in comparison to the trucks, if we introduce railway based carriage across from Karachi to Peshawar, we have a lot of a rush in terms of the Afghan transit trade. We have a lot of rush in terms of other imports for the industry, including steel and other even the coal for the cement industry we import, and we transport that coal by the trucks. So the trucks have to be replaced somehow with the railway based larger
that
massive
is one
carriages.
of the steps that you recommend for
And similarly
decarbonization.
other steps. And similarly, if you go down to the social sector, say per se, you still have mayas that are required to be reduced, reducing the energy consumption in the schools, in the colleges, in the major buildings, infrastructure
counting
side.
your carbon footprint.
And yes, that is, we talked about earlier, that how can we pay for the carbon, carbon pricing. If I'm using 5 cars without any restriction, well, I'll keep using unless I have to pay for the price for the carbon that I'm emitting.